morning, everybody, and welcome to CBI at 10. My name is Liz Mosey. I'm Editor of Partners at Tortoise Media, and it is a beautiful sunny morning here where I am in London after a really revolting and disgusting stormy evening. I thought we were going to be washed away, so I'm pleased to have made it through to you. We're joined by Sam and Sarah this morning, who will come on to talk to you in a second about clusters. Something I haven't known a lot about, but I've learned a lot about, even in the last 15 minutes from my extensive briefing notes that the CBI have kindly provided me with. I hope you're well. There's quite a lot other than clusters also happening in our lives, economically and everything else. And I'm going to go to Matthew Feld to start us off before we get to the sort of meat and potatoes of the conversation this morning. Matthew, I mean, I haven't got any petrol. I don't know if you have, but just give us a sense of what we think is going on.
Yeah, well, hi Liz, and good morning everyone from Cannon Place, the CBI's head office in London today. Look, I think Liz, they're completely right. Just an update on the current shortage issues. The conversation I've been having with loads of businesses over the last couple of weeks just tells me that everyone's really eager just to get in front of the sort of big trends that are coming around decarbonisation, automation, today's topic of sort of levelling up and clusters. But the reality is everyone's just really struggling to capture this current demand resurgence, which is really frustrating in many ways. So whether it be around labour shortages, gas prices spikes we had the last week, supply chain issues across the economy, and then right now the fuel shortage issue that you hit on. I think our analysis is that all these issues are clearly interconnected. On fuel specifically, I think from the sort of suppliers, very much the messages that we hear in the public domain. The reality is there's sort of plenty of overall supply. The challenge is the delivery to the forecourts. Consumer behaviour, you and everybody else hunting for fuel has led to a spike. I think we're now hearing that everyone has, apart from you Liz, perhaps has got approaching sort of full tanks. So the expectation is that demand might normalise in the coming days. But all that said, I think on the demand side, look, we're hearing from logistics firms who are concerned about supplies running low. I know from just chatting to local firms and builders where I live, they were sort of anxious over the weekend if their vans aren't full and they can't get to work and so on. So that sort of puts a brake on the economy. I think really encouragingly, we've now seen the government move a little bit on visas. I think at a headline level, that shows a willingness to put sort of the economy and pragmatism over ideology. The reality on that one is that the numbers and the duration, only 3 months, mean it might only have a little bit of impact. But overall, I think we're pushing for a solution that says, whether it be on fuel or some of these other shortage issues, look, we really need just sort of pragmatism. I think we need agility and grip. And the CBI actually in the last few days, we put forward an idea of almost like a sort of Cobra for recovery sort of concept, where you get business and government properly around the table, business insights coming in so we can see these issues, use our insight and intelligence so we can see them coming down the track before they become real problems. And then we get to a situation where we've got collective problem solving going on in real time, almost like harping back to the very best of when we were sort of working together to solve issues throughout COVID. Let's bring that same dynamic to the recovery so that we can really seize these demand opportunities rather than have the shortages hampering us.
Is it your sense, Matthew, that kind of will to fix the problem is there? Because, you know, be careful what you read in the media, and I say that as a journalist. You know, we've been hearing, oh, there's no crisis. It sort of feels like perhaps there are more problems because we could have seen this coming, is the reality.
I think that's the point on the sort of, let's get collective insights and then let's get agility to get them ahead of them. So I think, look, I think the overall business reaction would be to say, look, good that we're now leaning into it. We've had some solutions put forward, but it's that agility point, as you say. I think there's a little bit of a sense that we did have some good insights that these issues were going to cause a pinch point, some of the labour shortages. We know the challenges around HGV drivers and so on. The sooner we can get that into the sort of the decision making and the bloodstream, so we can capture those insights at an early stage and then agree what are the shared solutions to them, hopefully we can get to a situation where we've got more sort of prevention than cure going on, I think.
Yeah, okay. Thanks ever so much, Matthew. I don't want to lose the opportunity to talk about what we're here to talk about this morning, although I know that we could probably do a full 45 minutes on that if we wanted to. But we're here to talk about clusters. Now, this is something that we have touched on. We've certainly talked about levelling up on previous CBI webinars. We have touched on clusters and what they are and what they sort of do. But I think if we're going to properly understand it this morning and get a real sense of how the role it plays in the overall sort of build back better economic, whatever you want to call it, levelling up agenda, let's pinpoint what it is we're actually talking about. I mean, we were just saying before, I live in Bicester, which means I think I live in one. So tell me what it is and why the CBI thinks it really, really matters.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Look, I mean, I think essentially we think building and shaping economic clusters is a really good way to get a genuinely business-led contribution to levelling up. The sort of starting point for that is sort of, okay, what do we mean by levelling up? And I think for me, the exam question is something like, how do we get high value jobs, firms and industries in all parts of the UK? So of course, we're going to continue as the CBI with a big push around issues on skills and infrastructure, which we know are really important to sort of thriving places. We will continue, as we have been doing, high quality engagement with local economic partnerships, mayors and so on around the country to make sure we get those good business insights coming in. But this idea of economic clusters, a little bit of a new play from the CBI. And it has its origins in a sense that too often in the past we feel regional policy has been a little bit of a sort of cookie cutter approach from the centre and hasn't acknowledged and really played to individual local area strengths and so on. And we're looking to turn that on its head a little bit. Our feeling is that there are lots of these clusters around the UK, and we'll hear more from Sarah and Sam on that. But our sense is, look, they are highly productive. Their output in terms of GDP relative to their share of employment is really, really good and productive. And we think many new ones are likely to emerge over the coming decade, partly as a result of the net zero transition and so on. So there's something going on here. And our idea is to pinpoint these clusters, whether they be in automotive, in space, in net zero, and so on, and take them from good to great. So instead of having a good UK success story, we're able to make some of these clusters a genuine international and global play. And in doing so, we bring really genuine private sector leadership to this whole goal of levelling up. And from a CBI perspective, Liz, just to say, we've a couple of things we're really keen to do. One is to just add to the knowledge base. There's plenty of work done already on this. Sam will talk about later the sort of playbooks and things like that that are being developed. We're really keen to add to that as well, with a real focus on the sort of practical and the commercial angle around this, with a live map almost of the UK, capturing those learnings and ingredients of success, and to be really highly inclusive about how we go about doing that. So we want to get people crowded in, invite participation from right around the piece. And then secondly, Liz, we think there's something in just actually rolling our sleeves up and being active on the ground. And here we're keen on sort of identifying a few demonstrator clusters where I think the challenge is often, you know, there's lots of activity going on, but it needs proper sort of convening. And Sarah will talk a little bit about this, you know, the importance of a sort of go-to person that acts as the glue and holds the cluster together sort of thing. Putting that together with some local program offices, really making sure that we specify the business requirements for success. You know, we don't want to preempt those or sort of impose them from the centre, but it could well be that some firms are saying, look, we're just innovating at such pace that we need much more agile regulation to keep up with what we're doing. It could be that some are saying, actually, the sort of skills piece with the interaction we have with the schools, the colleges, the universities isn't quite right. Can we get people together to fix that? It could be that they're saying, look, we've got some brilliant ideas, but they're at the pre-commercialization stage, so we need some co-investment and funding going on. Can we help to fix that? If we can identify the issues, feed them in a really agile manner, get those sorted, capture the learnings from these demonstrators, feed them into playbooks, replicate that success story so that we can get it going on around the UK. That to us feels like a really business-led contribution to levelling up, and we can really make a difference.
Thanks ever so much, Matthew. I'm going to come to Sarah. I'm so sorry, the sun is really suddenly doing its thing in London. I'm going to come to Sarah Williams-Gardner. Good morning. You're Chief Executive of FinTech Wales. And I'd like to sort of pick up just on a couple of things that Matthew said. But first of all, I'd like to go back to the beginning, to the sort of genesis of a cluster and where it sort of starts. I know you've been involved in FinTech Wales for sort of just less than a year. Just tell us about the sort of beginning part of it, and I'm going to pull the blind down while I do that.
Firstly, Liz, good morning. Matthew, Sam, good morning to everybody and everyone who's listening. And thank you very much for asking me to share the story of what we're doing here in Wales. So the genesis of FinTech Wales, and you're absolutely right, Liz, I was given the privilege of being the go-to person for this cluster back end of last year, and terribly proud to do so. But the genesis of it was business leaders sitting together saying, we need to do things together, we need to work together, we're stronger when we're together. How do we actually do that? And they are business leaders, and they have day jobs, and they have teams and challenges and everything else. So the establishment of FinTech Wales was very much from the industry here in Wales, the epicenter of which is here in Cardiff, which is where I am today. And one of the things that Cardiff and Wales, I would suggest, has not been as good as they should be, is talking about leadership firsts. I mean, I'm terribly proud. Betty Campbell, the first ever black headmistress, was a Welsh headmistress, and she is having her statue unveiled in Cardiff Central this morning. So we're not very good at being loud and proud about things. So there's an element of working together, but there's also an element of amplifying what we do. So FinTech Wales was established, as you said, sort of 18 months, 2 years ago, a group of people who came together, business leaders, and Matthew made the point, it's really important that this is driven by the sector. Business leaders came together and they started to look at what was needed for a successful cluster. And we've done a lot of work here at FinTech Wales, which we'll come on to talk about, to analyse what we have here in the region, what elements we thought were missing. And Matthew talks about looking across the UK to see where places are doing things well, sharing that information. And there was an awful lot of work underpinned by some research that Deloitte did, which underpinned the Khalifa review, the strategic UK FinTech review that was announced earlier on this year, February time. And they looked around the UK to see where clusters were doing really well, the components they had, and therefore were able to share with people the components that maybe should be focused on a little bit more. I'm sure we'll come on to those in a bit more detail, but we here in Wales are sort of building our cluster. We look to our friends and colleagues in Scotland, who are most probably about 3 years ahead of us, FinTech Scotland, who are doing an amazing job up in Scotland, and there are many clusters across the FinTech network across the UK. And the other thing is with clusters, not only looking at your own and what you need to do to really drive it, but we'll come on to collaboration, because I think working across the UK, and I love what you were saying, Matthew, this is about high quality jobs all around the UK. This is, if we're going to level up, how can we collaborate and not duplicate, and truly work together?
So Sarah, with FinTech, why FinTech particularly? You said there were sort of existing businesses that were already there by accident, who got together and said, we think this could be something. Is that the thing, or is there as part of the evaluation of what the components are for a cluster, how do you then overlay what the type of cluster it should be? How do those things work?
I think the instigators of FinTech Wales were from the new FinTech organisations, and therefore it made sense for it to be FinTech. But interestingly, again, this comes from the Khalifa report, FinTech is not niche, in financial services, nor is it really a subsector. And this is a quote from Ron Khalifa, it's permanent. So whilst we call ourselves FinTech Wales, we work across the financial services sector, and it's really important for us to work across the ecosystem. So we have FinTechs and we have what we call Friends members, because these businesses can't exist without supporting services. So FinTech Wales was started by FinTechs here. It may be news to some of your listeners and possibly those of you on the call that comparison was invented in Wales. The comparison sites, which are now sort of almost 20 years old, which are sort of some of the early examples of FinTechs, were invented here in Wales. So Confused.com, Go Compare, Money Supermarket, Money Saving Expert, they are all Welsh businesses. And people most probably didn't realise that. So Confused were instrumental in getting together, as were some of the new personal finance FinTechs that we're seeing. Wealthify, Delio, we've got some payment members here in doing some really brilliant stuff through COVID. So, but what we've also brought together, and I think this is a really key component, is we've brought the established players together. And we'll come on to talk about some of the elements that we've done, but we work very closely with Admiral Pioneer. Now again, Admiral they're only 30 years old, they're in the FTSE, they're a highly recognised and rightly so insurance company in the UK. They did some very innovative stuff about serving their clients 30 years ago and have built on that and have created a really entrepreneurial sort of spirit here in Cardiff, and many of the businesses we see now are spin-offs of that. And so when we look at clusters, actually having those businesses, those entrepreneurial businesses, nurturing and spinning off ideas is also really key. So working with the established players, I've mentioned Admiral, Principality Building Society, Hodge Bank, one of the oldest still private banks, working with them to understand what's needed in the sector is really important. So the ecosystem element is critical.
It's fascinating. I did not know that comparison was invented in Wales. That's a good fact, good pub quiz fact. But some of the things that Sarah was saying, I'm going to come to Sam next. Some of the things that Sarah was saying about the sort of how a cluster comes together in the first instance, and some of the things about what it is and what it isn't. You sort of imagine a kind of futuristic pod with lots of tiny little companies beavering away at sort of crazy inventions, but actually it's a much heftier and sort of more fluid setup than that, with large companies and small companies and legacy businesses and new businesses all sort of working together. So Sam, I'm really interested to get into the playbook. You know, there's a sort of how-to guide of clustering, if you like, but tell us a little bit, first of all, Sam, about you're the Director of Public Affairs at Connected Places Catapult. It's not literally a catapult. Just tell us what the organisation is and what it does.
Yeah, for sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. So Connected Places Catapult is the UK's innovation accelerator for cities, transport and place leadership. We're one of, I think, 9 or 10 catapult centres backed by the government to support the commercialisation of UK research and development and grow businesses, create the kind of high value jobs that Matthew was talking about. Lots of these catapult centres are located in clusters, and our job is to help foster and accelerate them. So there's one based at Harwell looking at satellite applications. There are several facilities for high value manufacturing, most famously perhaps the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre in Sheffield, again part of a key cluster. And indeed there is a semiconductor one in South Wales near Sarah. So we as a network exist to stimulate the economy, to create high value jobs and to make sure the brilliant ideas coming out of universities are making their way into businesses, and more of those concepts are growing great British companies and more of those jobs. And we're, as the Connected Places Catapult, particularly interested in the application, as I say, of innovation to the places we live, work and play, and how we travel to and from. As you were saying before, there's a lot of change happening. That's a great time to be an innovator in that sector. And the question of clusters and how you create really high value places which attract investment and talent is key. So whether that's things to do with the lived experience, things to do with the ease of mobility services, whether that's to do with an agile planning system, which means that you can grow and scale your business. These are all things that we're working on, and companies we are working with are trying to deliver.
So Sam, I'm interested to get a sense of, you mentioned just before we went live that there's sort of 100 or so clusters that could be legitimately described as clusters. Obviously some are big and mature and sort of further down the journey, and others are sort of just coming to getting together. And there's a journey, isn't there, from sort of burgeoning to, you know, really properly being an engine of I guess leveling up. And you've, in your organisation, sort of produced a playbook. Is it about how to go from here to here? Is that what it says, the sort of steps and milestones and things you might need to think about?
Yeah, that's right. So I suppose it's worth saying there's lots of different ways of thinking about clusters. We take an interest in clusters that's specifically centered on innovation and the role of innovation as a kind of kernel and a catalyst for a cluster. And we've identified 100 so-called hubs of innovation or innovation districts across the UK. And we've looked around the world. There's something about 500 of these around the world. And we've looked at the kind of common ingredients that make the ones that are kind of globally meaningful successful. And they come in 10 different types. We were saying before that there's no kind of one size here. There's a variety of different flavors to clusters or innovation hubs, innovation districts, from the single location, the office, the kind of somewhere like the engine shed in Bristol, which is continually pumping out really high value enterprise and innovation, through to entire corridors. We were talking before about the Boston-Washington corridor, but likewise you've got the London Stansted corridor in the UK and the Oxfam Arc, and a variety of others. So they come in different shapes and sizes that reflect their natural and their human capital. But they all do. There does seem to be a common journey and some steps to follow. And so we've produced these two reports: one, a global review of the innovation district's landscape, and secondly, a playbook for place leaders to help them think about and go on that journey. And it's really a spiral. It's not a linear journey. You know, you have to kind of keep working round and reimagining and reevaluating. And critically, there's a role in that certainly for local governments and the civic leadership, and for the academic and research community, but also for businesses as anchor institutions and as investors and as entrepreneurial endorsers. So I'd recommend it to anyone who's interested in how you support your place to become one of these high value innovation districts and the heart of a new cluster for the UK.
So Sam, there's a great question just come in from Jim Hubbard, who's watching. I want to come back and talk specifically to Sarah about collaboration and how that works, and how, for example, FinTech Wales works with other clusters around the country. Before I come and ask Sarah, Sam, can anybody have a cluster? There's a sort of, you know, I can't just set up a business and then there's somebody down the road doing a similar one and presto, we're a cluster. There must be a sort of qualifying criteria. And I guess in order for this to be a meaningful strategy and policy, there has to be a sort of sense of some things are sacred, you know, otherwise it just becomes a nonsense. How do we sort of gauge? We want to encourage it, but also there's a sort of quality control as well. I don't know if I'm asking the question the right way.
No, you're exactly right. A couple of years ago, I worked in Cabinet Office and we were looking at local industrial strategies, and at that time, with advanced manufacturing or you know, advanced molecular biology, there was a hot topic, and everyone said, "Oh, we're going to be the centre in the UK for this thing." And you say that's not practical, is it? It's not realistic. I mean, what we found in the research we found is that, you know, you have to find your unique selling point, your unique feature. So as Sarah said in her example, there was an existing and burgeoning cluster of companies with a particular set of interest and a particular set of capabilities, often linked to an academic asset. In some places, we talked to Cornwall, and they've got incredible natural assets, and they've invested in innovation and industry and enterprise related to their natural environment and harnessing that for the green economy and indeed for the space economy. So there is being realistic about what your place is like. But establishing a cluster is, I suppose, the end goal. We think kind of establishing an innovation district or a hub for innovation is a good catalyst for that. And you can create the ingredients. You can engineer serendipity by creating environments in which people, entrepreneurs, innovators, pioneers, and investors bump into each other. And Sarah talked about the importance of spin-offs, and you talked about collaboration. Shared vision and leadership is really key here. So whether you're a business, whether you're the leader of the council, whether you're the the chair of a research institute, having a clear shared vision for the place and what you're trying to achieve together, and being open about that is really key. Too many places conceal and keep their ambitions and their investment strategies close to their chests, and we're not going to create these kind of high firing innovation engines if we're all trying to do it in isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to come back to Sarah. I suppose, and funnily enough, Phil McGuire has just asked this question, made this point in the questions field, which is there sort of always have been clusters, sort of natural clusters. To your point, Sam, about engineer serendipity, I was born and raised in marketing and advertising, and we used to call Soho Media Village because every other office was, all people like us. So it has always happened. But if you lean into it and try and engineer that kind of shared skills base and knowledge and what have you, I can see that sometimes just a little bit of extra help, accelerates everything. But Sarah, I'm particularly interested to sort of understand how the collaboration works and whether FinTech Wales is sort of slightly in competition with FinTech Scotland, or whether you really are best buddies. How does that collaboration practically work on the ground? What do you get from them and what do they get from you?
So I think just going back a little bit, the fluidity and the spiral I think is really important, because, and this isn't something you can come to a place and say, I'm going to create this and it's all going to happen, and you can't force it. So in Wales, this was already happening. As I said, I personally think it started 30 years ago when 3 guys left INSEAD and they decided to form Admiral Insurance, and I think that brought entrepreneurialism to the area. It changed Wales from being a call centre to a centre of excellence for finance, and that's made a difference. And so these things emerge over time. But just coming on to your point, I think it's really important to collaborate and partner. There is a FinTech national network. It's a virtual network. It's a collaborative network. And it's where all of the FinTech clusters or the FinTech establishments get together and they genuinely share knowledge and they genuinely support each other. And anybody who is representative of that organisation will be fed up with what I'm going to say next. But this is about leadership, and it's about identification and amplification. So organisations need people like me, people like our FinTech Wales. They need me to be on the Bonamine muddy pitches. Bonamine is a very small rugby club on the outskirts of Swansea. They need us to be in those places identifying talent. And when we identify talent in the shape of someone like Alan Wynne-Jones from Bonamine, we inspire them to grow and scale. We get them into the Swansea rugby clubs. We then get them into the Welsh teams, and ultimately we get them into the British Lions. Now, telling this story, which people will know I have done for many, many months since I started this job, I'm very pleased to say that Alan Wynne-Jones did lead the British Lions, admittedly, initially only for 6 minutes. However, he bounced back and he did come back. But I think when we talk about collaboration, this is about FinTech in Wales. Of course it is. It's about FinTech in Scotland, Northern Ireland, the West and the North and the West Midlands, and in the centre of London with our colleagues at Innovate Finance. But really importantly, this is about Team GB. And if we work together, truly together, and we truly collaborate, this is about FinTech on the global stage, and that's the aspiration. And Matthew talked about it earlier. It's taking great to good, and let's put that great back into Great Britain and the Great Britain Team GB, of which we're all really critical to, because we won't have those field teams spotting the next possible scaling organisation. People talk about having unicorns. Obviously, we're all aspiring to building unicorns, but there's also an element of let's nurture a herd of zebras, because if you get lots of zebras, out of a zebra, you might get 1 or 2 unicorns. So let's not always focus on one, let's focus on many, so that we ultimately have that strength and depth in the teams and the businesses that we've got. And as I said, that we sit on that global stage quite rightly, as the UK should, as a leader, specifically in fintech, financial services, and this plays really well to our heritage. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does.
Just to jump in with a couple of thoughts on a bit of that. Firstly, this thought about the sort of ingredients for success. I think a little bit of the thinking is actually too often we've tried to use the sort of same model and impose it on every cluster. And the reality is that, look, there'll be some common threads, but also there'll be some sort of unique needs depending on the nature and the industry mix and so on of the cluster. So I think there's a little bit of a sense, the more, yes, let's capture those common threads, but the more we can make it highly responsive to the needs of a given cluster, that is likely to maximize chances of success. And then just a second thought, your question about sort of are we competing or collaborating? And I think my sense is it is possible to both collaborate and compete. You know, the collaboration comes from the things that help everybody. If we're able to earmark what are the right sort of skills we need, what are the right sort of ingredients for success, the regulatory regime, the ecosystem of finance and things like that. Look, those are getting those right helps everybody. And then individual firms that compete in their own right as well. So my sort of take on that, it is possible to be both collaborator and competitor. It's not an either or choice.
Matthew, I totally agree with you. You know, we need to keep that competitiveness, otherwise we become complacent, and that won't be helpful either.
I think linking to that, there's a really good and I think important question that's been asked by Chris Dunkley in the chat, which I might send it to Sam to begin with, but everybody please do weigh in, which is, if you're sitting there in an area of the country that doesn't feel like it has a cluster, that feels like we're the people who are meant to be getting levelled, and you've just said, you know, we want high value jobs and industries across the UK, what are the mechanisms that we can support that can help those places get started or feel the benefit of sort of areas adjacent to them in the country where this is starting to happen? Do you see what I mean? How do we make sure that we don't just move all the money to a different place and different parts of the country get left behind?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, and this is a big sort of conceptual debate, isn't it? Is it about levelling up or levelling down? And we don't want to move investment away from the areas performing well, but we do want to make sure that we're spreading. I mean, we did some research last year. We employed a data science firm to look at job adverts and look specifically keywords around high value skills, and looked at how they were moving geographically. And there is definitely a diversification, a spread of high value skills across the UK, in part because of the work Sarah and Coys are doing, trying to accelerate and scale clusters outside the traditional sort of golden triangle in the southeast. I mean, one of the early things that places can do, that you can do this whether you're a business or you're a public authority, is to as been identified, lay out vision, share a vision, try and tell a story about your place. It was quite popular a couple of years ago to use a line for a Dolly Parton song about finding out who you are and doing it on purpose. And that's really what a cluster is about finding your unique proposition and really leaning into it, as you said, Liz. But lots of but whether local authorities or other public services, or whether you're whether you're a small business, the money you invest in your supply chain and in delivering services is a great way to catalyze additional innovation and bring in others like you. So thinking about how you harness procurement and how you where you invest and how you identify partners is a good way to attract others to your cause and to build, to start seeding new innovation activity in and around the sector that you're working in and around the place. So we've done some work supporting place leaders and some very large public investors like Network Rail and others to think about how they do this. But it's, as I say, equally true of businesses, and particularly large businesses have a lot of power to spark new innovation activity and to attract that, to create a gravity well around them in a place. And then you are well placed, as Sarah said, happened in Wales, to have a really powerful conversation with the civil leadership about what you're bringing and what they're bringing, what you need in order to catalyse further benefits and change the kind of quality of life investments that we talked about earlier, the ease of moving about, the agility of the planning system to adapt to scale and accommodate the kind of beautiful public realm which encourages people to connect and have those engineered serendipity moments. So I suppose that's a good starter, and that's one of the first things that we say in our playbook. Kind of wherever you are, you can think about the resources you have, and that includes the spend in your own spend to try and spark innovation and draw others to you.
Interesting. Sarah, did you want to come in on that too?
Yeah, I mean, we here at FinTech Wales, in sort of formalising our cluster, which is something that we've sort of been doing since I came on board at the back end of last year. We've given ourselves a very clear mission. I think this is really important. Our mission is to be globally recognised as a FinTech hub of excellence. And we know what we need to do to become that. We need to have the right skills and talent. We need to be partnering with. We're very fortunate to have phenomenal universities here. So we'll partner with the Welsh universities, but we are, and it comes back to the collaboration, we are also working with Edinburgh University, who is doing a significant amount of work on open data. So we need the skills and talent. And I think there's a really interesting thing happening there. No one's really mentioned COVID yet, but we've adopted this remote and flexible working. So that will help. I think it will help the Greater Britain not be completely centred around the main cities.
Mm-hmm.
So skills and talent is really, really important to us, and so collaboration and creating those where you are, both at the sort of higher education, but the secondary sector and the primary sector, making sure that we have pathways through education and work with all of the providers of that. I think the other thing for us is about investment. One of the things that we have heard time and time again here in Wales is early stage investment is not something that is as easy to get. So, where we know things are already in our sort of ecosystem, we amplify them, but where things are not there, we will look to build them. So, that investment is absolutely critical. We do have great relationships with the British Business Bank. We have great relationships with the Dev Bank of Wales, which supports not only businesses here in Wales, but wider. And also we have a great collaboration with our diaspora. But we need to forge relationships with London, and I'm really proud that the Mayor of the City of London has been down to see us on several occasions, and we are looking at where we can highlight what's going on here and share that investment. So skills, talent, investment, really, really important. And the ecosystem, we've talked about the ecosystem, just making sure that we really support those early stage businesses. And then lastly, the part that we think is really important, and Liz, it was interesting, you said, I didn't know comparison was invented in Wales. Wales needs to be louder and prouder about what it has achieved. Many people don't realise that comparison was invented here in Wales. Many people don't realise it was spun out of an insurance company. So we need to share those stories. We need to inspire other areas to be able to do the same thing, but be loud and proud about the fact that comparison is here. And so we promote what we do in the area. We also happen to promote that we're a beautiful part of the world to live in, that you can be on the mountains, you can be on the beach. Yeah. So again, it's that quality of life. And just coming back to the pandemic, I think if there's something that many of us have realised over the last 18 months is that the quality of life and where we live is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks ever so much, Sarah. I'm just conscious we've only got 5 minutes to go, and I definitely want to make sure I ask Sam a sense of how we, by which I mean the UK, are doing on this kind of strategy. I'm guessing it's not a strategy that's unique to this country, but how are we doing relative to other countries who are sort of trying to get this going, or who are really sort of making this a sort of key part of their economic and social policy?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're on a journey. I think it's probably the kind way to say it. There are probably far more established, globally visible innovation clusters and industrial clusters outside the UK than there are in the UK. We have a couple of really high-performing ones that are well known, but we have lots more that are up and coming very quickly. And I think the R&D strategy the government published recently, the investment in the Catapult network, and other research commercialization and economic business support services is all good news. So there's a way to go. I think, as I say, what was said at the beginning, that there's 100 odd places in the UK who are on this journey to become nodes of new clusters, and some of those are really high functioning. FinTech is absolutely, there is no Catapult for FinTech because you guys don't need it. You guys are doing great, and so I'm confident that they will grow as they have, but hopefully we'll see more and become globally meaningful over the next some time. But as has been said, this does take time. This doesn't happen overnight.
I was going to say, Sam, a couple of people have mentioned that they'd really like to get their hands on the reports that you particularly mentioned. So if you're able to share a web link or something like that where people can
I'll share them and you can send them out. Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. I guess my question is perhaps one to Sam more generally, and to Sarah specifically for FinTech Wales. What are your benchmarks? What are you aiming for? You said it's crucial to have a real mission, a sort of sense of purpose. You've talked really compellingly, both of you, about how you have to be deliberate about this and know your targets, know what you've got, know what you need, and really sort of lean into going out to get it by sort of any which way. What are we aiming for? If we were to come back and do CBI at 10 in 2030, what are you saying to me? We've done it. What are we aiming for?
Well, I mean, the strapline that we've used as part of this Hubs of Innovation campaign has been about sparking the innovation potential of every place. We said not everywhere can be a cluster, and we have to be sensible, but everywhere can have innovation to some extent, and we want to unlock that innovation potential inherent in each place, and to connect it into this, globally successful national economy. So that's the yardstick I'm looking for.
And Sarah, Silicon Valley in the valleys, I guess.
You've stolen my line. Absolutely. We are hashtag Silicon Valleys. There's no reason why we can't be. We do have those high aspirations. We're very much hashtag Scaling Wales. And we really are driving that. And that's not just FinTech, that's actually being more collaborative across, as Sam alluded to, the semiconductor work that is already happening down here is very forward leading and very innovative. But for me, I think it's the ecosystem. And if you came back to me in 2030 or maybe just 5 years from now when I've delivered my 5-year strategy, I want to be able to say to you, this is the number of jobs we've created. This is the investment that we've seen come into the region, and we have a thriving ecosystem that is collaborating with these businesses, not just the ones focused on delivering financial services, but the supporting businesses around it that enable those businesses to deliver their products.
Brilliant. It's been a really fascinating conversation, genuinely, to help, I think, everybody just to conceive of what we mean when we talk about these clusters and how one would sort of materialize, and the amount of effort that needs to be sort of, as I say, purposefully and determinedly ploughed into it to sort of bring it, to crystallize it in a sort of way that's going to make a difference to people's lives. As always, I love to have a webinar where we talk about Dolly Parton and zebras. I think that probably that's the answer to most things. So I want to say a sincere thank you to our invited speakers this morning, to Sam Markey and to Sarah Williams-Gardner, and as always to Matthew Fell. There is another CBI at 10 next week, and I believe on Thursday there is Torsten Bell talking about all kinds of interesting things, and as we know, James Harding, who's my boss, is a Torsten Bell super fan, so tune in for that. Have a lovely rest of the day. Go put the kettle on before you check your emails, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.